budget. And in the context of even the manifesto, for example, when they come about, it's on the cost of living. The cost of living of the people then, 18 months from now, the people on the streets are still not comfortable. They are not feeling good. So that has to be addressed. When the manifesto was out, it was people-centric. But once they are in government, today, more of a corporate-centric in nature is being seen. So this budget have to seriously elevate and bring about to mitigate the fear in among the people that they will be able to have a minimum standard of living.
Is taxes one of the main instruments that we can use? I mean, we know that GST is something that we won't be addressing in this budget because there were announcements made by our Prime Minister and also Finance Minister to that end. But how can we play around with the existing taxes?
I guess you brought up a very good point. Taxes is one of the fiscal measures that the government always undertake in order to elevate in terms of managing the budget deficit, and also in terms of looking at the current situation where we're forecasting a global recession. I guess then it has to be balanced up with whatever fiscal stimulus package or initiatives that they want to strengthen the economy. We've seen the global trend within ASEAN and even in India that the income tax rates have been lowered in order to stimulate the economy and also to promote investments into those countries. Is this an area that the Malaysian government would tend to like to adopt in the upcoming 2020 budget? That's the main issue that I think they will consider. But on the other side, as you mentioned earlier, the shift from GST to SST has already resulted in a bit of a downfall in the tax revenue collection over the last 12 months. And how are we going to balance it up? So I guess at the end of the day, the main question here is that with the budget deficit and with the availability of the tax revenue collection that is available, how are we going to utilize the funds to make sure that we are resilient or we are able to accommodate in terms of reducing the impact from the global recession coming up? That is what we're expecting in the years to come. I guess we've brought it up. There's a lot of potential disruptions that are going to be forecasted. I just want to bring up a good point that, the upcoming decision of Brexit, even in UK, is also going to be another major disruption.
Right.
And I guess all these new disruptions are something that we cannot predict or even to measure in terms of how to be resilient against it. But I guess at the end of the day, the government needs to ensure that it has the right policies in place to make sure that the tax revenue collection are actually utilized in a manner that is going to be beneficial to both the economy from an individual consumer perspective and also from a corporate sector perspective as well.
So based on what the Finance Minister has said, the voluntary declaration of income tax has helped in a sense that there have been a lot more people coming into the tax brackets and declaring their income based on this voluntary declaration that was announced and had been extended to the 30th of September. Do you think it will be continued, seeing as how it has brought more people into the fold, or do you think that there will be other measures to bring people into the tax bracket?
I guess the voluntary disclosure program was a very good initiative by both MOF and the Inland Revenue, because it actually brings up a very fair framework of transparency, allowing taxpayers to come forward to make sure and to recorrect their income tax returns. The bottom line here is that the policy that has been introduced by both Ministry of Finance and Inland Revenue allows taxpayers to come up and make sure the declaration that they have made will support the initiatives taken by the Ministry of Finance. I hope really that there will be a formal policy available so that it allows the continuous ability for taxpayers to correct whatever errors, whether it's intentionally or by inadvertent mistakes, because one of the main objectives that came out from Pakatan Harapan manifesto is that they want to promote proper governance, and proper governance means allowing the right thing to be accommodated by the taxpayers.
Well, we're still on the subject of tax. One of the taxes that was not very popular was the RPGT. It was reintroduced at 5% for properties that would be disposed after you've held on to them for more than 5 years. Do you think this will be revoked?
I don't think it'll be revoked, but one of the measures I would hope that the government will look at is maybe to reintroduce back the 0% RPGT, maybe for a period of holding the investments, maybe more than 10 years, because any investments that you hold for more than 10 years, it's not really speculative in nature, it's actually for your investments. And if you look at today, where the consumers and Malaysians actually invest in properties more from a savings perspective, they could be utilizing the realization of the funds from the investments for their education, their children's education, for their retirement plans, or for any financial requirements or needs that they need in a short-term measure. So I guess penalizing such measures in terms of investments of real properties that you held for more than 10 years may not be the area that the focus should be. Focus should be more on if there's any other investments that are speculative in nature, then maybe we can tax that because that's really income in nature to the individuals.
Because if I'm not mistaken, they only made about 100 million ringgit from that particular introduction of RPGT that they had for the last year. Prof, on the topic of property, this is a very interesting one because it seems to be, for the man on the street, that there's no real initiative to help new homeowners per se. How can we circumvent this situation? Initially, when Pakatan came into power, they removed SST for building materials in the hope that prices would come down. But then we're faced with the glut of property, and it seems that Pakatan is helping developers to deal with that glut instead of helping homeowners purchase properties they want.
Yeah. Yeah, in this context, that's why, the Pakatan Harapan, when they were trying to come to power, they were people-centric. The thing was they were addressing and they were meeting all the needs, which is the problems of the people. So there is an acute moral hazard problem with most of the ministers from the Pakatan Harapan because once they come to power, their behavior has changed. They are now concentrating on the corporate sector. On the one hand, even though the developers are holding on to these properties, there is no reason why shouldn't they reduce their return on investment and reduce the prices. Let it be addressed for the Malaysian public to be the first priority to own houses. There is no necessity for us to try to address the developers' needs when they have the holding power for this long, meaning to say they are financially capable of trying to cut some of the necessary returns and profits for the betterment of the people. So the glut has to be met with price reduction.
Absolutely.
Not necessarily going to Hong Kong and trying to sell it off there. The thing here is the people here has to be addressed first. That is the reason why the manifesto is important, because 60 years of BN rule, if the manifesto is just something which is common to them, but for the Pakatan, the first year in government, this manifesto is like a promissory note in which those who went onto the streets, these are the same people who are reformists. But when they come to power, they are trying to rationalize, saying that we have to make as lowest losses as possible for the developers, but at the expense of the people. People on the street are still not feeling the good factor. They do not have that thing yet. So we have to convince them. If there is need to be reduced in the profits, it has to be reduced. It has to address the basic needs of the people. The housing need is a basic need. The cost of living and the things which, affordable homes, for example. But if you have abundant luxury properties, get the prices down.
Absolutely. I think we're trying to resist this reduction in price for some reason. I think it's only natural that that cycle has to be completed because the prices of property in Malaysia have generally been going up and they haven't come down for a while now. So I think that reduction is due, but we'll come back and discuss this hotbed, which is property, when we come back. Don't go anywhere, stay wherever you are. We're still predicting what could be factors that will be included in Budget 2020. Don't go anywhere.
aspirasi kerajaan
dan harapan rakyat kami bawakan
dalam pembentangan belanjawan 2020.
11 Oktober
Bermula jam 3 petang.
Itu merupakan operasi
We're back, and don't forget to join Ismail and Hazel for the live broadcast of Budget 2020 to the nation. But for now, where we left off, we're speaking to two of our guests in the studio. Joining me, of course, is Professor Dr. Hasanuddin Abdulaziz, Dean, Kuliah of Economics and Management Sciences with the International Islamic University, and Mr. Bernard Yap, partner with Ernst & Young Tax Consultants. And when we took a break, we were on the cusp of discussing the reality of the property market. So, Prof, I'm going to pick off back from where we started and where we left off. We're talking about how the developers seem to be gratified at this point in time, really. We're also looking at measures to make now access to funds easier for borrowers. Do you think that's a good move? If we make more borrowers bankable, so to speak, will it make the property market issue solved? Will we have more purchasers that can actually pay off their loans in the long run?
Yeah, even if you make the people accessible to loans, we need to see whether they are able to pay back these loans, because the income, as of now, there was reports showing that Malaysians, around 47%, they are living beyond their income. So having a luxury item, luxury properties to be owned or for them to be accessible is not feasible for them, because the affordable homes for average Malaysian is in the range like 200 to 300,000. That is also very difficult. Even for Prima, there are many rejection on the accessibility of loan because they are not able. The income has not been raised to a certain extent for them to be able to meet their living expenses. So the developers have to cut down on the prices. If there is a glut, is the supply is greater than demand, economics says that the price have to go down. But if the government is assisting and helping for the developers to have this hold, or the bankers are able to make them to hold on to these properties because of arrangements with the bankers to delay payment from the developers and so on and so forth. So that is a distortion to the actual scenario. What they should do here is bring it down, and the government should be able to address this by making sure that if the bubble has to be burst, bubble have to burst in the property market.
I think you can't have your cake and eat it. This is an open market, and market forces have to actually take its correct course. But if we look down south, our neighbour Singapore seem to have solved the property conundrum. They have a model that actually helps every Singaporean own a home. The land is state-owned. There are special contractors or developers which are hired to build these homes at very, very minimal profit margins, and then the land is still owned by the state. When a purchaser comes into a unit, if he or she wants to dispose of the unit, it goes back into a pool, not into the open market. Mr. Bernard, how far away are we from something similar, or can something similar work in KL, Penang, Johor, just to start?
I guess at the end of the day, if you look at the current funding of the whole projects, whether the government is able to step in to initiate the same kind of project that you've seen undertaken in Singapore, given that obviously, number one, with the budget deficit that we have to plan the funding and these requirements of I suppose joint venturing with either the GLC or the private sector to make the homes available at a pricing that is affordable to the B40 consumers. That's the main question. The second part of it is then, I guess, is the carrot that the Malaysian government, whether via through tax incentives or grants, to make sure that, as what Prof has mentioned earlier, to make that piece of property available to the B40 consumers. Obviously, pricing comes to play as an important measure, but obviously then the measurement of the profits for the private sector who wants to joint venture with the government plays an important role as well. So I guess balancing the hardest part of it between what the initiative of the government wants to undertake, having the joint venture with the private sector, meeting the requirements of the B40 consumers, you have to balance that up. I do agree that I think if the government plans to come in to take initiatives like this at this moment, because like we said earlier, with the forecasting of the global recession coming in, the glut and the property bubble that's going to burst is not going to help the overall economy of Malaysia at all. So this is one area, I guess, if you want to stimulate using stimulus package to undertake to defend the current expected recession coming in. This is one area, housing, that would be good for the whole economy. And I guess from a consumer perspective, it's one that was not going to be a white elephant that would be beneficial to all Malaysians.
We're going to move on to the theme of the budget. The overall theme of the budget is shared prosperity. Now, it is very vague as to what shared prosperity means, as those figures have not been crunched and have not really been put into a proper picture or narrative for the people. We know that it's going to be shared prosperity, we just don't know how that mechanism is going to be on the deliverables. So before we get into shared prosperity, we're going to take a quick look at another sort of public opinion, and we're going to use that to factor into what people want or expect from shared prosperity. Let's take a look.
Hopefully there's more incentives for opening of factories and things like that, and also no increase in excise duty for the coming years. Hopefully we can maintain the same tax rate. I think the government should review a lot of the prices after the implementation of SST from GST, because I think a lot of companies did not actually reduce their prices. So probably a revision of the profiteering of businesses and the reviewing of prices, because I think there's still a lot of businesses earning massive profits from upstream, and it's not being translated down to customers.
My personal hope is to see a budget that is actually rakyat friendly. What I mean by rakyat friendly is something like close to my heart is the cost of living, especially essential food item. Yeah, so essential food item that will actually help cushion the rising cost of living for the lower income people. Petrol as well, I think it will impact, but the other part I think a bit too steep, I would say, is the power. I mean TNB, electricity bill, if there's way that we can look into lowering the cost, that will help us a lot. Yeah.
My hope for budget 2020 will be there will be more initiatives that will be taken for internship students, because myself I'm an intern, so I don't see a lot of benefits given for internships where we are being used and we work hard for it, but we don't get any benefits. We don't see a lot of budget that was given for the internships. So I see a lot of students now struggling to survive, even 800 for now, so it's not enough for us. So I hope that one day or maybe next year there will be some improvement for budgeting 2020 for all of internship students, so they will be more motivated to work hard. It's not because just about the money, or maybe they say it's only for experience, but it's nowadays, in this era, we need money to survive. So I hope for next year, 2020 budgeting, it will be, something we will work for intern students.
Well, probably some of those excerpts can be used to formulate what shared prosperity should mean. When we look at shared prosperity, there is no denying there is a widening gap that exists between the very rich and the very poor. In this nation, we were shocked recently when a United Nations survey found that hardcore poverty still exists in pockets of Malaysia, something we thought was eradicated based on data from the previous government. So, Prof, what should shared prosperity look like? I mean, wages have not increased tremendously, and this is not just a Malaysian phenomenon. It's, I think, pretty worldwide. Even in the US, we see the same kind of growls coming out of workforce wherein wages are not increasing. So what can shared prosperity look like to you?
The shared prosperity vision, seems to be like the new economic model. So as any country, they have to have a vision, so as to pull in all the rakyat to understand that the government will seriously embark upon an inclusive growth for the people. So the shared prosperity vision is to provide a decent living standard to all Malaysians, regardless of their ethnicity, social class, and region or location where they come from by the year 2030. As nowadays, they said that they have a framework, but in 12 Malaysia plan, they will be showing the strategies and so on and so forth, and the action plan, how they want to achieve this. So, but as of now, the economy, if you see the intra-ethnicity, inter-ethnicity, the inequality of wealth, of income between them is very huge. This has to be narrowed down, narrowed as far as possible. To address this, we have to address how are we going to make those who are in B40, in B20, how are they going to be reskilled or skilled to meet the fourth industrial revolution. This is a leapfrog. But the shared prosperity means that we shouldn't leave behind anybody. If they lack in skills, we have to address these issues. If, for example, institution of higher learning, the education budget has to be increased, but into the right needs of it. For example, the needs for vocational, technical, this is where it is going to be. The next industrial revolution is the blended between the software and the hardware, and it is physical. It's not like the three industrial revolution before. It's just changes of productivity of the industries and so on and so forth. But now when you see manufacturing 4.0 and so on and so forth. So when you say about shared prosperity, you shouldn't be widening the gap between the have and the have-nots. So far, the new economic policies was to address the restructure. In a way, it have helped. But when we go for equity participation, equity sharing, this has led to wide divergence between the have and have-not within the ethnicity and also within the intra-ethnicity. So we have to see to it that the handouts or whatever the APs and so on we are giving should be addressed in such a manner that this can be shared. And we should address the leakages, the problems which this comes about. And if you do so, and if we do correctly targeted it to those people who are deserving, then you will see that the shared prosperity will be there. Rather than there are a lot of wastages.
Just quickly to get feedback also from the chairman of Mara Corporation, who's agreed to join us on this program via Skype. So we have on Skype right now Mr. Akram Shah Muammar Ubaidah Sanusi, the chairman of Mara. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, thank you, Terence.
Hi, Mr. Akram Shah, good evening to you. So we are at that point of conversation about the shared prosperity, and I'm sure Mara comes into play, seeing as how it's addressed Bumiputra equality, Bumiputra training, and that has formed somewhat the backbone of the Mara operations. Can you talk to us about your own wish list coming out of Mara as chairman for the budget and how it will help address these areas of interest?
Okay, firstly, I need to clarify. I'm the chairman of Mara Corporation, not the chairman of Mara.
Chairman of Mara Corporation, sorry, sir.
It makes Dr. Zita quite upset. Okay, I have a point of view that's quite aligned with Mara, though of course our responsibility is more on the corporate side of Mara's assets. Now, on the more larger scale, I'd like to echo the two factors. One, we've actually seen a lot of fiscal prudence over the last year, and that was necessary because of what the new government inherited, and because of that, perhaps the budget last year was a bit more cautious. But I think it's time for us to actually unshackle some of the chains that was put in to rein in some of the excesses of the past. I think our interest rates are too high relative to the rest of the world. I think that we can potentially even consider things like providing tax holidays to our people. It was done before, very drastically, during the last Asian crisis. Arguably, we are now entering a potential new crisis in the world, in a situation where we don't have the strength, or we have less strength to weather the crisis easily. So to preempt that, we can potentially do that at the wider or the higher scale. With regards to Mara has always acknowledged that the best way for us to achieve is through education. Now, the attitude to that now has actually changed quite a bit, because whilst the focus in the past has primarily been around getting more degree holders, more and more now we're seeing a relevance on two ends of the scale. First is on the TVET end. We need to actually get our vocational-based workforce more effective. And I like to actually reflect on the German model, because in the German model, we have actually a larger proportion of the economy driven by people with strong vocational training. And there is no negative stigma, which unfortunately we have in Malaysia when it comes to vocational training. People actually are proud to have become technicians, mechanics, plumbers. We really need to look back and see who the real earners are on this economy. In our economy, and this is something that was predicted by Paul Krugman in the 90s, that in the future, everyone wants us to be the computer software engineer. But in the end, the person who's actually delivering the service, the plumbers, are going to end up being the rich ones. And it's ironic, because plumbing in Malaysia is seen as a 3D job. And it's being done by, potentially Indonesians, Bangladeshis, and why? It should be done by Malaysians. And I heard one of the issues we have is we have Myanmaris going into to become mechanics. mechanics are getting more and more, useful. Now we have actually apps where people are just changing over batteries at home for people. And changing over batteries, it seems, is making more money than software engineers these days. So why shouldn't we look that way? Okay, that's on the broader scale. But on the top end, there's still that room for people to push on to a postgraduate and even postdoctorate level. Because whilst you need to actually drive the economy and you actually get stronger, more effective employment for the majority, for us to really do the step up to Industry 4.0, we don't just need the practitioners. We need to be able to have those who do the high-end innovation. And the truth of the matter is this: shared prosperity is meant to get everyone in an equitable footing. But it doesn't also mean that we abandon the aspiration of getting out of the middle income trap.
All right. Encik Akram Shah, before you proceed, because I just wanted to address this in the 3 minutes that we have left with you, real quickly, because Mara is widespread throughout the whole nation, and I understand that you're the chairman of Mara Corporation. Would shared prosperity also mean equitable distribution of wealth amongst the various states? Because there seems to be a discrepancy that hasn't been addressed in that area.
Yeah, of course, it has to be. And we need to be quite clinical in terms of how we achieve that. I'll give an example. I was in Sabah recently, and we were looking at the Kota Kinabalu industrial area. And we discovered that one of the biggest issues in Sabah is the cost of electricity is too high. But the cost of electricity is too high because there's no real manufacturing in Sabah. And we haven't actually figured that out. What sort of manufacturing actually suits in Sabah? Why is it everyone is talking about the Sabah economy booming and talking about that primarily in terms of commodities and in terms of tourism? And both actually doesn't help us in getting electricity costs down. Because for electricity costs to come down, you need to have manufacturing, because that's actually the big electricity consumer. How do you then justify having reasonably sized IPPs or even proper generators to be justified as capital expenditure into Sabah? So you need to figure out the manufacturing side. We have to be careful not to box our different states in. And I'm from Kedah. We're very proud that we're going to have the KXP in the government's plan. But that's, to many people, mind-boggling. Why is it Kedah is going to have some international airport that's going to do the cargo? What happens to Penang? But what's the problem? Because Penang can be there and Kedah can be there, and the country will continue to grow. And what's wrong with having Kedah with a big whacking airport that's also supporting Penang and Seberang Perai? We need to not box ourselves in. Sometimes our problems tend to be legacy, right? I mean, we mentioned before, TVET. Germany is a rich country because the people are rich. And the people are rich because they are good plumbers, and they're good mechanics, and they're good technicians. And half the country are rich but not really major degree holders. So what's the big deal?
All right, thank you very much for being in conversation with us, although via Skype. We'd love to have you in the studio at some point in time in future. Thank you, Mr. Akram Shah. And he's addressed a very important issue. I mean, the skills gap is also something that we have always talked about, and it's a legacy issue because under the previous government, we had certain targets that we just fell short of meeting. A quick update coming out of the current government would be the place and train, whereby the students will be placed in industry and we look to the industry to train them to be the kind of workforce that the industry wants. This is one move that has been taken by the current government. But before we get too caught up in talking about TVET, which is completely in another area altogether, I'd like to come back and talk about the MA 63 financial agreement pertaining to Sabah and Sarawak and how we distribute our wealth across the various states. Mr. Bernard, how do we do this? How do we actually make sure that all states enjoy the same level of development? Is this possible?
I guess from a theoretical perspective, all states should be entitled to a fair allocation based on the requirements and needs. However, I think, as brought up earlier, each state should look at the various targeted, and I guess I have to put in the word also strategic initiatives based on the strength of the of the relevant state, where I think you can have economic developments and also marketing and financial impact to the state, then that's where the location should be. Where there is none, then I guess the government will have to step in to look at initiatives to be able to strengthen and build up the weakness and the initiatives from it. So one of the examples we talk about, and we kept on talking about the gap between the salary, wages and everything. Is there any initiative that should be undertaken to promote any automation or semi-automation of some of the activities that are currently so manual driven, because we know a lot of the manual activities are actually done by foreign workers and not by us Malaysians. And we go back to the point brought up by the Mara Corp chairman, if the vocational schools are there to help to designate, to promote certain part of the semi-automation activities that can be undertaken by the Malaysians, then maybe that would help to elevate and reduce the gap between the wages. That's one point for it. And I guess part of the ecosystem, how much of the availability of any tax incentives can be granted to manufacturing services industry or even SMEs to undertake some kind of automation and digital projects that will actually benefit the Malaysians to take up these kind of vocational occupations.
Prof, when we look at industry per se, they're not very widespread. They are concentrated on certain pockets within the nation. Is industry required for a state to boom, and why is it that some states attract a more industrial development over others?
Yeah, there is a genuine disparity between the states. And the other thing, on the other hand, you need to see that most of these industries are driven by low-skill laborers. And at one time, most of these multinational corporations, for example, they were concentrated in free trade zones with the necessary incentives and so on and so forth. At that time, during the 70s and the 80s, the need for them to be around was to provide employment to the locals. But as of now, today, we seem to see most of these multinational corporations, for example, they are there, but mostly their workers are foreign workers, not Malaysian workers, meaning to say Malaysians have moved up or moved away. So we need to address why is it that industries, SMEs, for example, are driven by low skills, and meaning to say work permits were given for low skill. So how are we going to go about to be a high income nation if this is the policy which the government allows? So the necessary incentive has to be given to automate. When you automate, meaning to say, with the population which we have and with that kind of training we give, they will be able to be absorbed and they will be able to see that these industries are at par with the developed nations. But if it is low-skill labor in such a manner that just exploit them for the sake of making the revenues, generate the income, and then we, on the other hand, we say our locals are not interested, definitely they will be not interested if you do not go and automate and be at par with the developed nation. And as we are going for high income, we have to really put our money where our mouth is.
Right, absolutely. I do agree with that. And it looks like we're going to take another break, but when we come back, we'll come back and talk about more of the finer points of the budget 2020 and some of the predictions from both my guests moving forward to the 11th of October. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back, and thank you for staying tuned. We are looking at what is to come, or what may come out of Budget 2020 as we move forward into the future that is New Malaysia. On the show, we have Professor Dr. Hasanuddin Abdul Aziz, the Dean Kuliah of Economics and Management Sciences with the International Islamic University of Malaysia, and Mr. Bernard Yap, partner with Ernst & Young tax consultant Sindiran Berhad. Gentlemen, we've reached the concluding points of the program. So first and foremost, I want to bring you back to a point which Prof raised of how we should just, forget about the focus on the deficit and just put forward an expansionary budget. Should we focus this expansionary budget on high-impact special projects that will bring multiplier effect for years to come? Prof, what can those projects be?
These high-impact, high-multiplier projects and the contingency funds, these are normally for stimulus purposes. If, for example, like the 2008 financial crisis, in which it started off with a financial crisis, but it affected the real economy. So in the context of Malaysia, we had to, private sector was reluctant to come in, so the government expenditures have to increase. So normally when got high impact, this kind of nature is normally it is on roads and transportations and the big things which is where they need big budgets, and this will in the long run will be of help to and assist the people's well-being. So this is the areas where this kind of contingencies are to be, but they are not to be used without full responsibility. We need to be very careful because, as mentioned, the revenues are going to be affected. So we are having this as a cushion in case that we need to stimulate the domestic economy.
What kind of projects do we really need? I mean, we have seen some mega projects shelved. We have seen some revitalized. The impact of these projects have yet to be seen. What kind of projects do we really need as Malaysia?
I guess you brought it right. We've scaled down some of the large projects, and savings there could be used to stimulate the economy. Also, the government needs to reevaluate whether it's necessary. From my personal view, I think a couple of areas. Number one is healthcare. I guess healthcare is one area that we continue to face rising costs in medication and medical costs. And so that's one area, I guess, there will be continuous usage of the facility as and when it's readily available. And that would have quite a positive multiplier effect to the economy. Second one, we talked about it, education. That's where the future of our next generation is going to be, because if we want to promote us to be promoted to be a global economy, and I guess we want to be a steady flux of good generation coming up in order to take over from all the foreign workers. That's one area to be. And I guess the last one, Prof brought it up very clearly, public transportation. Public transportation is one that I guess the construction industry will be able to enjoy from the multiplier effect as well. And plus, it will give the very positive effect to the consumers and the taxpayers here that the utilization of the tax money actually goes to good use to it. I guess the last bit here is that we're going to have Visit Malaysia 2020.
Right, we are.
That's going to be a good, nice tourism that hopefully will bring us increase in foreign revenue coming in, because as you can see, you did brought up a good point. We're not doing too well from a foreign currency perspective, but that could be a positive side for us, because as and when the foreign income coming in to spend in Malaysia, that's going to help to elevate the economy as well.
As we look at it, we seem to have covered all the bases for the budget, but I just want to get a quick health check of the Malaysian budget from the both of you. Prof, we have rising GDP figures, we have a current account surplus, but we have a weaker ringgit as compared to our neighbours, and we have a stock market that's underperforming. How do we make sense of this?
This is very fuzzy. You see, if the stock market is good, then foreign investors are present. So
they're present in the market.
Right. So the currency should reflect an appreciation of this influx of but this doesn't seem to be. Our currency is weakening, and this has to be addressed. Meaning to say there is an outflow, still continuous capital outflows, and this has to be addressed. Why is it so? If the debt is being managed, that means foreign debts are being managed. That means the currency should be able to reflect the fundamentals. But as of now, this has to be seriously taken into account to balance it in such a manner that even the growth is positive, 4.7, now they are forecasting for 4.5, but the economic is always the future positive expectation. So if your expectation is not positive, if the people are not feeling good, so things won't move. Businesses are not happy. So we have to bring back the good feel factor.
We once had a tourism minister that says the weaker ringgit is good for tourism.
True, but weaker for tourism, but as of now, also imports is also reduced, but still our currency doesn't seem to be appreciating the way it should be. Maybe it's because the exports are also declining. Maybe the surplus is there, but the export might be declining because of the palm oil. The electronic sector has reduced in export throughout. Singapore have lost more than 27% of the export in electronics. So the nature, the cross macro variables as a whole is making it such that we have to bring in the positive expectation so as for us to be able to get the figures correct.
What's your take, Mr. Bernard, on the health of our stock market and how that reflects on the ringgit, despite other positive factors, including rising GDP figures?
Agree mostly with Prof as well. We've seen last year, 2019 budget was a very cautious initiative undertaken by the government. I guess that's fair because it's 6 months into the new job and they needed to make sure that they're prudent in terms of spending on mega projects, whether that's going to be vital to the economy. But I guess coming up with the 2020 budget, we got to have a very clear policy. Government, like I said, has to be bold enough to undertake certain measures that will actually help to stimulate the economy, because you need to bring back and build the confidence of the private sector to be able to jointly participate with the government in these initiatives. With all this potential savings that we have from these mega projects, I've always made it clear that we have to be bold enough, go right into the projects where we think that it's definitely going to have the multiplier effect and to be able to enjoy it by all the Malaysians.
On that note, thank you, gentlemen, for being in conversation with us this evening. Thank you, Professor Dr. Hassanuddin Abdulaziz, and thank you, Mr. Bernard Yap, for being on the program. We've reached the end of our predictive analysis of what is possible in Budget 2020. But we do hope that you will join us on D-Day, which is on the 11th of October at 3 p.m. with Ismail and also Hazel, as they will be there live when the Finance Minister tables Budget 2020. It will be the second budget to come from Pakatan Harapan, and we look forward to a budget that will be truly a budget that encompasses shared prosperity. Thank you for joining me. I'm Terence Das. I'll be back speaking about what was tabled come 13th of October as we do our post-budget analysis. Thank you for joining us once again, and have a great Malaysian week ahead.